I take the digital balance. I think the connection is... Yes, we are connected. Start the broadcast now.
The same man ran the United States government's response to the AIDS epidemic and the COVID pandemic. Same title, same institute, 38 years. Anthony Fauci admitted his first AIDS patient to the NIH Clinical Center in January of 1982. At that point, the disease had no name most people recognized. There was no treatment. There was no roadmap. He became director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases in 1984. He held that position for 38 years. In January of 2021, nearly 4 decades later, he became chief medical advisor to the president for COVID-19. He advised every sitting president from Ronald Reagan through Joe Biden on infectious disease. The office was the same. The man was the same. When the COVID pandemic ended his public career, the AIDS epidemic had not yet ended. It is still ongoing. What does it mean that a single institutional figure connects both crises, not as a coincidence of timing, but as the designated federal response? On October 11, 1988, AIDS activists stood outside the NIH and FDA buildings in Maryland and accused Anthony Fauci of killing people. The specific accusation: he was moving too slowly, drug trials were taking too long, people were dying while the bureaucracy processed paperwork. An activist named Larry Kramer published an open letter calling Fauci a murderer. Protesters carried signs reading, "Red tape kills us." On May 21, 1990, hundreds of activists stormed the NIH campus. They brought torches that spewed rainbow-colored smoke. That was the AIDS version. During the COVID pandemic, Anthony Fauci was accused of killing people again. The accusation was the opposite. This time, he had moved too fast. He had overreached. He had imposed restrictions that exceeded his medical mandate. Congressional committees summoned him to testify. Conservative media ran his name as a daily fixture. Calls were made for investigation, for criminal accountability, for prosecution. Too slow, then too controlling. The standard reading is that these reflect 2 different political moments with 2 different coalitions of critics. But they cannot both be accurate characterizations of the same consistent institutional behavior. The record does not resolve which, if either, was correct. 2 sets of accusers, 40 years apart, certain they had the same man exactly wrong. When Fauci became NIAID director in 1984, the institute's annual budget was approximately $320 million. He stated this figure himself in a recorded interview in 2024. When he retired in December of 2022, the budget was $6.3 billion. The same institute that designed the AIDS research agenda designed the COVID research agenda. NIAID researchers partnered with Moderna to co-develop the COVID-19 mRNA vaccine. The vaccine achieved above 90% efficacy. It was authorized within a year of the pandemic's declaration. The budget grew by a factor of roughly 17. The mission stayed the same. The director stayed the same. Whether the scale of that institutional growth across both crises reflects effective response, institutional expansion for its own sake, or something the record does not address, the sources do not say. Fauci said this in a recorded interview. The fundamental structural biology that we focused on with HIV, the same investigators collaborated with each other and used that structure-based vaccine design. That never would have happened if we hadn't had fundamental basic research that started off decades ago. The mRNA platform that produced the COVID vaccine was built on structural biology developed during decades of HIV research. The investigators who worked on the AIDS problem worked on the COVID problem. The science carried directly across. The scientific community's standard reading is that this is how basic research works. Foundational work in one pathogen becomes the toolkit for the next. Whether 38 years of continuous institutional leadership by one person was necessary for that transfer, or incidental to it, is a question the record does not answer. In 2014, the National Institutes of Health awarded a grant to a nonprofit called EcoHealth Alliance to study bat coronaviruses. Of that grant, $600,000 was subcontracted to the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This is not disputed. It is in NIH's own records. It is confirmed in a letter from NIH Deputy Director Lawrence Tabak to Representative James Comer, dated October 20, 2021. In May of 2021, Fauci testified to the Senate. The NIH and NIAID categorically has not funded gain-of-function research to be conducted in the Wuhan Institute of Virology. NIH Deputy Director Tabak subsequently told the House that NIH did fund gain-of-function research at the WIV through EcoHealth Alliance. Both statements are in the official record. Both cannot be correct as stated. Congressional investigators and the House Select Subcommittee on the Coronavirus Pandemic maintained that the research met federal definitions of gain-of-function. Fauci and NIH officials maintained it did not, that the definitional threshold was not crossed. Scientists consulted by named fact-checking outlets were split on the definitional question. The split remains. In June of 2026, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released documents asserting that Fauci funded dangerous gain-of-function research on bat coronaviruses at the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and that Fauci lied to Congress in 2024. That is the executive branch's stated position as of this recording. It is not a court finding. The question is not adjudicated. The popular version of this story is vague. The same person ran both epidemics. A general sense of overlap. That version is strange enough. The documented version is more specific. The same institute that led the AIDS response awarded a grant that funded coronavirus research at the laboratory identified as the likely origin of the COVID pandemic. The same director ran the institute when the grant was awarded and when the pandemic began. That detail is not in the popular version. It is in the paperwork. Whether that constitutes coincidence, institutional pattern, or something the record does not yet explain, the documents raise it. They do not answer it. In 2021, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. published a book arguing that Fauci had deliberately manipulated both the AIDS and COVID responses to benefit pharmaceutical partners, suppress cheap treatments, and concentrate power in federal health agencies. Kennedy argued this across both eras, the AZT controversies in AIDS, the treatment suppression claims in COVID, and framed Fauci not as negligent, but as operating with intention. That is Kennedy's argument. It is his interpretation, named and sourced to a published book. Here is what the documented record places next to it. In the AIDS era, Fauci's critics accused him of moving too slowly on experimental drugs, the opposite of pharmaceutical capture. He was later credited by AIDS activists with loosening trial requirements after sustained pressure. In the COVID era, he was criticized for moving both too fast and too slow, depending on which critic was speaking. The AZT claim that Fauci pushed a deadly drug that killed more people than HIV has been specifically characterized as inaccurate by named fact-checking outlets. AZT later became a component of effective combination therapy. The documented record does not establish a consistent pattern of pharmaceutical favoritism across both crises. Whether Fauci's institutional relationships with pharmaceutical companies created conflicts of interest is a question the record raises. It is not a question the record closes. Kennedy's reading requires a consistent directional intent across 4 decades. The documented record shows a man whose critics could not agree on which direction he was moving. The record shows one man, one institute, 2 epidemics. A protest pattern that repeated with the accusation reversed. A budget that grew by 17 times. AIDS research that built the COVID vaccine. A grant from that same institute to the lab at the center of the origin question. All of that is in the documents. The question the documents leave open is the one this episode has been walking toward. If the same institution produced the response to both crises, and may have had a hand in the conditions that made one of them necessary, what does it mean that we built it that way and left the same person in charge for 38 years?
This has been the Digital Madman. If you enjoyed this, please share it, subscribe, and smash the like button so we can get the algorithm to pick it up. Thank you, and I will speak with you next time.